Welcome to Rugby Uncovered. I'm Paul Rodriguez, and myself and Tom Nash will be talking to Susie Appleby. She's the women's head coach at Exeter Chiefs. Welcome to the show, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Susie, I just wanted to go back, if we can, to when you first started playing rugby. Can you tell us about that? Yeah.
Yeah, you can do. So I didn't start until much later than the girls start now. I was at Birmingham Uni. And how it started was I was playing netball, which I used to do mainly, and hockey and all that kind of stuff. And after a netball match, I was in the pub, like you do, and all the rugby girls seemed to be having a really good time. And I thought, oh, actually, I'm going to go and try that. And that's exactly what happened. So that was my intro to rugby. Off I went, picked up the ball, never looked back, really.
Brilliant. So obviously, attitudes to rugby have changed, for women's rugby, has changed a lot, thankfully, over the years. Looking back, how was it different then compared to how it is now?
Well, it is interesting. I mean, that was 1999, probably very just turning into 1990.
Yeah.
So a good while ago. I was brought up in the game because I grew up in the rugby club. My brothers played, my dad played, and that's where I went on a weekend. So that's kind of what I knew. I guess attitudes were never, I don't think there was ever any hostility. I think there was more lack of understanding as to why girls would want to go and play rugby from those that hadn't really experienced it. But the interesting thing always was, as soon as you got on the field and they kind of watched you play, everyone was a bit like, oh, okay, well, it's the same as the boys, and actually you're really rather good. And then, any doubts kind of went away, really. But obviously there's been, the game has changed 100%, in the men's and the women's games. And, the women's game especially. I had the luxury of being the first pro, I'm using my fingers here for inverted commas, but I was paid to play, back when I was playing for England. So I was really, really lucky. Obviously now they have full-time professional contracts available. So, yeah. It's an ever-evolving game, and I think it's going to continue to evolve.
In terms of fitness, how have you seen the game evolve?
I think S&C is that strength and conditioning is a massive, massive part of the game now. I don't think it really was in my era of playing, and certainly in my early days of coaching. So it's becoming increasingly prevalent, and almost like when I was involved with the England Sevens program for those 6 years. It was almost the S&C were dominating, rather than the rugby. And it used to be pretty frustrating, really, as a rugby coach, getting enough time hands-on with the players. Now, it's important to recognise, obviously, that it is incredibly important. And without robust players and without the core stability having its groundwork, then the players are not going to stay on the field. So it has become more and more important. And also the education of the players has become better and better to understand their bodies and why they need to do certain things. But again, interestingly enough, working with female athletes, there are those female athletes and probably male athletes as well, but I think more in the female games and not just rugby, who are more inclined to overtrain and do too much. So again, the understanding and the education is as important as the actual physical going in the gym.
So if we went back to when you first started playing rugby and the differences between the fitnesses of you then and you now, would you be in the Premier 15s, do you think? And I'm saying this is for someone who was on the SAS Are You Tough Enough? So, and I remember that program, and it was tiring just watching it, let alone being on it. That must have been amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. That's a whole different conversation. But there is it's very simple. The answer to your question, the game is wholly different. What you'll see on the pitch now, in the female game, much like the male game has changed, is athletes. And you'll especially in a sevens arena where, if you look at a country like America, countries like China, Japan, etc., they're not rugby players and they have no rugby history. But however, they are competing on a world arena. Russia's another one who haven't got those rugby skills in the background, but they have managed to manufacture athletes, and then actually sevens is a much simpler game of the game when you look at it in simplistically than 15s. So that's a simple answer. Now, could I compete in Premier 15s? Probably not. And this is because, going back to your last point on S&C and conditioning, the physicality has become massive. Maggie Alfonsi, you guys have probably heard of, led the way in terms of the big collisions, and they're becoming bigger and bigger. So you have to be physically robust to be able to play the men's game or the women's game, because they're exactly the same. The collisions are bigger. It is a more physical game for 80 minutes. So, those players that took the field, when I was first capped in 1994, I back myself to say were very much rugby players, and they really got the game. Your Jill Burnses, your Emma Mitchells, et cetera, of the game. They really understood the game, but they weren't the physical specimens. Now we're getting physical specimens, and some of them are as educated and understand the game as much, but sometimes I wonder whether they actually watch as much rugby and really understand the game as much as my playing peers did. Again, I could spark a real a real debate here, but as I said, when you look at the players now, they are physical specimens, as you would expect to be at the top of their game.
Absolutely, we've seen some fantastic games, and I think that's the surprise. For some, it's a surprising thing, you of what you see. You see a different game, but the fitness levels are just off the charts. Absolutely amazing. So you share responsibilities for coaching at Exeter Chiefs. How does that work, where they say in a company, if two of you have the same opinion, then one of you is redundant? Now, I'm sure there are times when you agree and when you disagree, and that's healthy. How do you deal with disagreements and how to move forward?
Well, I think it's a brand new environment for both of us. I've probably got a much longer coaching profile or larger coaching profile than Amy has. Amy will admittedly say, she's got a prolific playing profile, over 100 caps for England, but she's learning the game and learning how to coach. So we're kind of in different stages of our coaching career. And quite honestly, the simple answer is we don't know yet, because we've just got going, and now it's obviously been curtailed.
Yeah.
We've only coached together a very junior team down there, because she hasn't coached in Premier 15s yet, which is a whole different ballgame. Now, we do have the luxury, and we are, even during this lockdown period, we have had the luxury of doing CPD with Rob Baxter, with Hayden Thomas, with all the coaches down there, which has just been absolutely fabulous. And watching their sessions and being a part of just on and off the field, their analysis sessions, et cetera, has really helped Amy in particular upskill to where she needs to get to, if that makes sense. Yes. So that's not really answering the question, but the short answer is we haven't been in an environment yet where we've had to agree or disagree.
Right.
We very much have the same opinion of how we want to play.
Brilliant.
Which is important, isn't it?
Yes.
If there's two of you in it, then, it's important. We both want to attack space. We want to keep the ball on the field as much as we can. We want to almost emulate how the boys are playing, because they're doing it really, really well. But for that, you need certain players. Whether we're going to have these certain players, we're making progress, certainly, towards the squad and the final squad that's going to hit the field in September. But as I said, we haven't had fallouts yet, because we haven't got to that stage.
Right.
I'll let you know.
Brilliant. How do you stay up to date in terms of fitness trends?
Well, I very much defer to my S&C team, because they're the experts and I'm not. I come from, you've already touched on it, 20 years ago when I was in my peak of playing, the fitness looks very different to what it does now. So there's no point me going, this is what I used to do, when actually Dom Thorne, who is our S&C, is absolutely fantastic. He works closely with Twigsy, who's our male S&C, head of S&C down there, and there's lots of S&C coaches obviously at Exeter Chiefs. So they are up to date. They're very current. We have a luxury down there at Exeter Chiefs is we'll be using GPS units, and we'll have 25 of them. So again, it's not in any club that I've been in. We haven't had that luxury before. We've had a few, and some of them have worked and some of them haven't. So we are very much hands-on. We'll know what our players are doing, what their heart rate is, what they're achieving in any given session, as in their meterage and the efforts and all that kind of stuff. So it's all very technical now. As I've already touched on it, sometimes a little bit too technical.
Yes.
But actually, when you look at players and you look at if they're blowing, then and the data matches, then actually you've got a pretty good idea of where your player's at, and importantly what we can do in the next week or the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get them up to speed of where they need to be. So as I said, it's not really down to me. I'm looking at the players thinking, yep, I can pretty much see where you're at. But actually, as I said, that's supported by the S&C coach, by the data, and everything else that goes on is paramount. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Fascinating. Now I've got Tom on the line as well, and he's waiting in the wings, dying to ask you some questions. So I'm going to hand over to him. Thank you.
Hi, Tom.
So hi, Susie. You left Gloucester Hartpury last year after about 5 years there. You came to Exeter Chiefs with Amy. Why?
3 of those years was in Premier 15s, well, 2.5, I should say, up at Gloucester Hartpury. So when I went to Gloucester Hartpury, I was a police officer, which you may or may not know. So I was a police officer. I'd done 20 years in the job. I'd been coaching as well as playing for probably 10 years already. I had a massive desire to coach. And at Gloucester Hartpury, I saw an opportunity. Phil de Glanville at the time had set up the women's program and was very much pushing and driving it. So I took an opportunity. That opportunity became full-time. The Premier 15s came around and it was amazing. I set up the program there and, we were 2.5 years in. Then along comes Exeter Chiefs and Rob Baxter, and I wasn't looking for a way out. I was very happy at Gloucester Hartpury. It was doing really well. But when I sat down with Rob Baxter and I went to Exeter Chiefs and I saw everything and their ambition, and that was to emulate exactly what the men's team have achieved. And they've come from kind of lower leagues, if you like, all the way through up to the top, and they are very much gunning to remain at the top. And that the owner's another person to mention, Tony Rowe, has the ambition, and I think that's the key word for me. I think they have more ambition than I felt I was able to achieve more down there than at Gloucester Hartpury. Plus, and this is a big important thing, I wanted to carry on learning as a coach because I'm nowhere near obviously finished or where I want to be, and to learn alongside Ali Heifer, Rob Baxter, all those amazing coaches in an amazing club. And alongside that, the third bit is my family, and we've got young kids who are going to grow up by the beach. So there you go.
Yeah, I lived in Exeter for 8 years, so I know it quite well, and I've seen rugby, women's rugby as well, evolve incredibly quickly. It's impressive. Paul touched on it, you touched on it, but you were heavily involved in joining up, if you like, the age group teams at Gloucester Hartpury from kids to the first 15.
Yeah.
Looking back on it, what part did that play in the development of the players and instilling loyalty and passion in supporters?
Yeah, well, I think people talk about cultures, don't they, all the time, and it's a word that people throw around, but what does it mean? I think Hartpury is an amazing place to work and be as a student, as a player. It lives and breathes rugby. Which is why it does so well. Now, it's interesting because that's an institution-based Premier 15s team, whereas now I'm in a rugby club, so there's some similarities and some differences. The academy that runs up there, the men's academy and the women's academy, are absolutely crucial for the success, but not just for the success on the field. It's everything that happens off the field, and developing as people, developing as players comes very much along, hand in hand with each other. So you've already touched on it. Those kids go away age 16 now into Hartpury, into the environment, and they're immersed in almost a professional rugby program. But we hope up there, or we have hoped that, they'll learn how to survive first and foremost, how to be adults, not just kids. But they'll also be playing at the top of their sport alongside studies. So it's you suddenly become an adult overnight when you go to Hartpury, but you're only 16. So this then carries on into the uni program, which is fabulous as well. The Bucks teams, and then into Premier 15. So it all very much works in a circular fashion. It all feeds each other. Everyone, your young kids will look they'll come and watch the Prem 15's team play on a Saturday and go, that's what I want to do, which is awesome, isn't it? So yeah, it's always going to be successful, and the institution and the amazing facilities that Russell Marchant has got going on up there are just second to none. Obviously, you've got Gloucester next door for another year or so as well. So as I said, the difference down at Exeter Chiefs is it's a rugby club, and I was intrigued as well to see what the difference is. It's going to be more challenging, but what I've been doing for the last 6 months is trying to get into the college, into Exeter College. I haven't been into Truro College yet, but they're going to be our two hubs. That's where our next players are for Exeter Chiefs women, coupled with the very, very good program that's going on already with Poppy Leach at Exeter Uni and Plymouth Uni. We are working on to get better and better. So all of that, as I said, creates the player that you want to come into Exeter Chiefs. And some will make it. Everyone lives and breathes rugby down there. It is unbelievable. So, as I said, it's exciting times, but a little bit different to what we've had at Gloucester Hartpury.
And you've got Exeter Athletic Rugby Club as well. I don't know whether they play a part, but so this talent spotting, what amounts to an ongoing scouting operation, essentially.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, so again, when I went down there, there's two big counties effectively, aren't they? Devon and Cornwall, massive counties that are full of young kids playing different sports. So we want to get those talented ones playing rugby. So we've actually set up a position for a female rugby academy manager, much as the men's have been running forever and ever. So we're going to have a female equivalent who's going to reach out into those counties and go and find them, go and find those kids. Now, they might be in the colleges already, they might be in schools, but we're going to try and identify them at an earlier age than we have done already. Now, the hope is every Prem 15s club comes with a centre of excellence, which is, again, that 16 to 18 age group. Now, we're hoping that's going to start stretching down to the age group below. So you start to get a proper academy structure, much as in the men's game. So those boys and girls will be playing in their academies. But as I said, they'll probably be down in their hubs because it's a long way for parents to drive, every week up to Exeter Chiefs to be a part of things. So, as I said, it's going to be a slow burn. We're not going to get everybody to play rugby overnight, but there's a lot of talent down there already. And as I said, alongside Exeter Chiefs now being in Prem 15s, we hope that female rugby players are going to stay there. They're not going to be, go off to Hartpury to do their studies. They're not going to go off to different unis. They're going to stay more local to where they were born. And that's how we're going to grow our local talent.
Going back to you and Amy, you were a 3/4, Amy a forward. Does that help in your coaching partnership?
Well, I think so. I've already touched on it. She's doing the dark arts, isn't she, down in the front row, ensuring that I get the ball and get to play what we want to play. So it's definitely a good combination. When you look at skill sets and what we can input to the players, it's a good start to have a halfback and a hooker in the equation. Now, with the men's staffing setup being, and us all working so closely together, got Rob Hunter doing the forwards, you've got Ricky Pello, who's a scrum half specialist as well. Hayden Thomas, it does the skills. So we've got all sorts of specialities that we will be leaning on to support our program, which again is really advantageous to us because we're going to have our players on a 3-day working week and be as semi-professional as we can be as life allows at the moment, and then we're going to grow that game to be as professional as we can. So yeah, I think me and Amy are a small part of it, obviously an important part of it, but actually what our network of support is the bigger picture and the more important, I think.
It sounds very impressive. You mentioned earlier that you were heavily involved with the England Sevens. We've looked at Rugby X2 on Rugby Uncovered. Is there a risk, do you think, of overcrowding of formats? Is there room for several versions of Rugby Union?
I don't think you'll ever overcrowd it. I have to be honest. I've seen Rugby X play, but I haven't been much of a part of it. So it seems to be successful. Sevens. What was sevens when it first started? It was it was just a small version of the game. Now look, it is massive. It's an Olympic sport. There's rugby league. There's all different versions of the game, but effectively they're the same. There's just obviously the different rules and the different. Most of those games suit different people. People might not want to do contact, so they go and play touch. Or they might want to do a slightly different version of the game, so they play Rugby X, and then the sevens species, and I'll call them a species because they are, your Carlin Isles of this world. they're not going to set foot on a 15s pitch, are they? Because they're not going to excel like they can do in sevens. So it's different. It's horses for courses, really, isn't it? You could almost say they're the same game, but they're incredibly, incredibly different. Which is why most of our athletes are either now going down the sevens route or the 15s route, and most countries, if they're able to, are having different squads. And that's going to be key. Again, another whole different topic we could get into. Next summer, now the Olympics has moved. You're going to have players transitioning over from an Olympic sport in Tokyo, and then 6 weeks later stepping on the field in New Zealand to play 15s. Now, the success of those countries that are going to flip their players is going to be interesting, isn't it? That's in the women's game because no players overlap in the men's game. So again, we're just evolving, and the women's game is still not, in some countries, independent enough to just achieve at the top of both games.
Yes. There's almost an analogy with cricket in this, isn't there?
Yeah, there could be. I mean, as I said, you could start exploring all different sports, and it's definitely worth exploring because they're so different in many, many respects, and your likes of Natasha Hunt, Emily Scarrett, those players that have been there and they've been to the Olympics, and then they've gone, you know what, I really, really want to win another World Cup. And that's why they've chosen to come back to 15s, because Premier 15s at the end of the day is an incredibly successful league. I've got players coming from overseas to play in it when we kick off in September. And that's largely because we want to be competitive from the off, and it being a World Cup year, the English players aren't moving. So actually, we're having to reach overseas to allow us to be competitive from the get-go. Hopefully, she said.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, this is a question from a rugby fan because there's been a lot of talk about it in the last 6 weeks.
Okay.
Do you see any rule changes appearing in the game in the next year?
Well, I'm very pleased to have just seen no scoring on the post protectors just being brought in, because that is the most ridiculous thing, wasn't it? You just to watch, teams migrating towards the post and never being able to stop them scoring. So for me, I'm just like, that is amazing. You're probably better off asking the refereeing types about rule changes. As I said, the game is evolving, and every rule change usually is to either to make it more safe, which you can only applaud, or to keep the ball in play for longer. And we can all applaud that, because when you look at an 80-minute game, it's actually the ball's in play only about 35 minutes. So we all want to play rugby with the ball in hand for much longer, don't we? So that's what any rule changes are all geared around. So as I said, I don't know what rule change is going to come next, but they make decisions they make them for good reasons, don't they?
Sure, absolutely. I personally hope that the line-out rule changes and that this lifting aspect is eliminated and players still have to jump.
Yeah. Well, it would be good to go back to that, because again, that's why you've seen, it's a whole different game, isn't it? It's almost a pointless exercise. There's no fair competition, if you like. If you've got one athlete against one other athlete, then it makes it more fair, doesn't it? So I think, in the old days, I think rugby was purer, wasn't it? It was much purer. And I think a lot of the reason that people like watching women's rugby is because it's still got that purer element, because we're not as physical, we're not as able in the kicking department, so we play more ball in hand, so actually the ball stays in hand for longer. We're also not as obsessed with patterns of play necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Because we don't have as much time together. So you see more off the cuff playing, and you see people's X factor coming into the games. And that's what I hope never disappears with the more professionalizing of the women's game.
You haven't mentioned skill levels and hard hits by muscle-bound 1,500 stone players, and that's for me at the top level. That you could argue that's what the men's game has become. It's become too physical in a sense.
Well, it has, hasn't it? And those massive collisions are finishing people's careers at times, aren't they? Which you just don't want to see, do you? How some players are still playing, I have no idea, because they've had that many collisions, that many concussions. Now, of course, everyone wants it to be safe, and we have our concussion ruling. It's not exactly the same as the men at the moment, but the collisions are getting bigger. My hope is that it never becomes just who's got the biggest hitter on the field, because then I think we've lost the beauty of what the game is. So I don't think the women's game will ever be full of muscle-bound women. I hope. I just don't think it is. The players that play are just becoming more and more athletic. I don't think bigger and more muscly is necessarily defining the best players in the country, which is good.
No, I entirely agree. You want lighter women who are quick and can sidestep, essentially. Yeah, as well as obviously the heavy women.
Yeah, Susie, thank you so much, Susie. We really appreciate it. For a listener or anyone who wants to keep in touch and follow you, are you on social media?
Yeah, I am. I follow Twitter a lot, and mainly because I love the sporting updates that are so instantaneous. So yeah, I'm on @Susie99999 is my Twitter.
Great.
I don't do Instagram or anything like that. That kind of does it for me. But yeah, and also I would say for any listeners, and young girls in the sport, it's an amazing sport, and we must never go away from that. The opportunities for women, whether it be at the top of the game where you can be professional, or just absolutely loving the game, all those, and just playing for fun and having a few beers and all that kind of stuff. All those opportunities still exist, but there's just more of them. So as I said, any mums and dads out there, it's a brilliant, brilliant game, and it's not changing.
Absolutely fantastic.
You're in the right county for it as well. You really are.
Yeah, absolutely. Apparently so.
Yeah.
Excellent. So look, we look forward to seeing you pitch side as soon as the new season starts, which we just can't wait for now. It's just talking about it now is just like, we just want to fast forward time. So just wish you all the best with the upcoming season. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. And when we do get going, every home game is going to be a big day out for the family. That's what I'd like to say. So look out for the adverts and the fixtures and that. And we'll love to see everyone down there.
Superb.
But thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay.
We hope to speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye now.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.